What's the greatest gift we have in this congregation? Anybody?
Each other.
Each other. Well, God first, of course, and grace. And then you. You. Even if you're new here today, maybe God has kind of lured you here for something that God is beginning to unpack. I'm excited about the future here. It's going to take a while to get into what God has in store for us here, but it's done because of you and your generous spirit. So I ask you a question. What makes for a generous heart? What is at the heart of a generous spirit? Anybody?
Love.
Love. Great, we're done. We can go home. What else?
Giving without fear.
Giving without fear. Fear of rejection, right? Fear of, will there be enough, right? Fear of what will happen. What's at the heart of generosity? That's what I want to spend the next few minutes kind of helping us unpack a little bit as we look at the story of Zacchaeus. So, what do we know about Zacchaeus? You guys are going to help me with the sermon today, so you can sit back. He's short. He's small. What's that?
Unpopular.
Unpopular. Why is he unpopular? Because he's a tax collector, not just because he works for the IRS. It goes deeper than that. Okay? He's unpopular because he's a tax collector. And it turns out he's a child of Abraham, which means he's Jewish. And the Jewish people in his community are very unhappy because he works for the Romans, which makes him both morally, ethically, and spiritually unclean. He's hanging out with folks that are not God folks. And even worse than that, he's the chief tax collector, which means he's got folks working for him, and he's making sure he gets more than he needs. Because the Bible also says he is what kind of a person? A rich man. Rich man. So, how is Zacchaeus treated by folks in his village? Outcast. Marginalized. And so here comes Jesus. And just like the adults did, they're standing shoulder to shoulder. And you can see Zacchaeus. I don't know. What is it about Jesus that attracted his attention? Tell me. What do you think? What about Jesus got his attention? I mean, he heard Jesus was coming. And he heard Jesus was coming so much. What did he decide to do? He decided to run. Which in that culture, men didn't do. It was undignified to run. And yet he was willing to run. What about Jesus got his attention?
His heart was pulling at him.
His heart was pulling at him. Maybe there's some hope. Maybe there's some possibility. Maybe I'll be treated differently by this great rabbi. Or maybe he'll say something to me or something to them that'll change my relationship with him. Who knows? Well, all he knows is he can't see him because he's too short. You can see him trying to get through the crowd, but they don't want him to get into the front of the line. So finally, he does another undignified thing. He runs and climbs a tree. And everybody in the crowd is looking for Jesus. And so is Zacchaeus. And you can hear the crowd thinking, will he notice me? Will he notice me? And who does Jesus notice? Zacchaeus. The marginalized, the unclean, the outcast. And then he invites himself to Jesus' house. You should try that sometime with your neighbors. Hey, I'm coming to your house tonight for dinner. Give me a week. And he invites Jesus into his heart, into his life. And what happened? What happened? He takes him up on the offer, but something happened to Zacchaeus. And how do we know something happened? He gave his money away.
His heart changes.
He gave half of everything he had. He said, I'm giving to the poor. And anybody who I've defrauded, I'm going to pay back 4 times what I took from them. Which is actually an Old Testament requirement. So Then what does Jesus say about Zacchaeus? What does Jesus say? What's that?
He has salvation.
He has salvation. He is a child of Abraham. Now think about how that felt to Zacchaeus. Outcast, pushed out, denied, probably wasn't allowed to go to church or synagogue. And the Son of God says, you are a child of Abraham. How long in his life has Zacchaeus been denied that spiritual identity? And yet, Jesus doesn't see the stealing. He doesn't see the extortion. He sees the child of God in Zacchaeus. And that made all the difference. In the movie Ironweed, Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson play two hobos, basically. And they're walking along and they see a woman who's lying down on the ground. And they have this conversation with each other about the woman. And Jack Nicholson says to Meryl Streep, you know, who is she? And Meryl Streep basically says, well, she's a woman of the evening, and using a more intense word. It wasn't even prostitute. It was the word that started with a W. And so Jack Nicholson says, well, that doesn't surprise me. Then Jack Nicholson says, well, what do we know about her? And well, she came from China. Well, what do we know about her? Well, she was, there too. And then Jack Nicholson says, what else do we know about her? And Meryl Streep's character says, she was someone's child. She was someone's child. Going deeper and deeper to discover the child of God and the person that we may want to push out is one of the powerful steps to unlocking the power of generosity in ourselves and in others. I call it the Grinch effect. Remember the Grinch? He's up there on the mountaintop, and what does it say happened to him in one moment? All of a sudden his heart was what? 3 times. That's right. It wasn't 10, but 10 would be nice. But 3 times. You remember the picture? It busts through the little... That was the cartoon version, right? It's the Grinch effect. And that's what happens with generosity. It's got this catch-22 thing, you know. It feels good to give, and then we start giving and it feels good. It's that love tank thing. Remember the love languages? If you've never read the book, The Love Languages, and you're in a relationship, I encourage you to read that. We all have a love tank. And when someone doesn't speak our love language, our love tank gets empty. And when our love tank is empty, we're not as nice, we're not as compassionate, we're not as generous, we're not as loving. But if someone speaks the love language that appeals to us, it fills up our love tank, and that stuff just flows. It's the same way with generosity. When you look for the child of God in the person next to you, it changes how they receive you and receive God. And generosity has this thing. It's a love tank flowing over. And then you discover as you're generous, in the varieties of ways in which we can be generous, it feels good to be generous. Remember last week? Genesis chapter 1, we're made in the image of God to be fruitful and multiply. And that's not just about having children. It's about flourishing. Being part of God's creative activity and life-producing quality. It's our sweet spot. And as that happens, it fills that tank, and then there's more love, and it kind of has this cycling, transformative effect. There's a Native American story of a boy with an old Cherokee once told his grandson about a fight that was going on inside of him. He said it was between 2 wolves, and he said one wolf is evil, anger and envy and greed and arrogance and self-pity and gossip and resentment and false pride. And the other was good. The other wolf was good. Joy and peace and love and hope and serenity and humility and kindness and generosity, truth and compassion and faith. And the grandson thought for a moment as he heard this information and then asked his grandfather, "Grandfather, which wolf do you think will win?" To which the old Cherokee replied, "The one I feed." The one I feed. The heart of generosity is giving and sharing love. Seeing someone not for who they have been, but for who they are as a child of God who maybe has been through the most difficult circumstances. And you know how that can contort us and misshape us. But we're still, in the name of Jesus, seeing the child of God and then loving them in a way maybe they have never been loved before. And the heart of generosity is when we choose with our lives to live and act in ways that reflects the love of Jesus. And all God's people said, Amen.